For the record, Louis kind of forced me to make this video. So what is Chinese penhold? Chinese penhold is a way of holding a table tennis racket where your thumb and your index finger are on one side and your other three fingers on the other side. If you don't play penhold, nor want to play penhold, this video isn't really going to be that useful for you. Chinese penhold is most popular in China, but over the years, less and less people have been taught to play with penhold and rather with shakehand because of many advantages that shakehand has compared to penhold. There are many differences between penhold and shakehand. Some of them are less obvious than others. One of these differences is the arm positioning. For example, when you're playing a forehand using shakehand, your palm is facing to the side, whereas it's facing down when you're playing penhold. Also, when you're playing a traditional backhand with penhold, it's very different from playing a backhand with shakehand, but it's fairly similar to the reverse penhold backhand, which is more widely used today. Another difference between penhold and shakehand is actually the racket. You see here, the penhold racket has a handle that is shorter than a shakehand racket. Also, most penhold players prefer to have a gap between their rubber, well, mostly their forehand rubber, and the handle of the blade. This gives them more comfort when holding a penhold because your index finger and thumb will be constantly touching this part of the wood here. Since there are less penholders and shakehanders out there, there's also less penhold blades in the market than shakehand blades. So you have less choices when you're choosing equipment. Just something to think about if you want an EJ. Okay. There are many advantages that come from playing penhold. One of the most obvious advantages is the amount of wrist that you're getting. This gives you a lot more of an advantage when you're playing over the table shots like flips and pushes because you can add more wrist to get more spin on your shots. When you're playing penhold, your fingers are a lot closer to the contact point than when you're playing shakehand. This gives you a lot better feel for the vibration of the blade whenever it comes in contact with the ball. This feedback also lets you develop faster. If you're more of a recreational player or someone who isn't really that serious about table tennis, then playing penhold might be better for you if you choose to play the one-sided traditional penhold style. This style allows you to use only one side of the racket, and therefore you only need to buy one sheet of rubber for your racket. You just need to buy the blade and the rubber and you're all set. You don't have to buy a second sheet of rubber, which can save you money. If you're at a lower level and you choose to play penhold, you will have a slight advantage around the people who are on the same level as you. This is because when you play penhold, you're not playing the most common playing style, which is playing right-handed shakehand. Same goes if you choose to play left-handed, or you're a chopper, or you're a long pips blocker, or you're a short pips puncher. Since less people will be adapted to your style, more people are prone to making unforced errors, which gives you a slight advantage. Now the disadvantages. One of the disadvantages from playing penhold is the fact that since your fingers are really close to the contact point, you're a lot more prone to having your fingers hit the ball rather than the racket. So this will sting for a few seconds, which is annoying but not that bad. Another disadvantage from playing penhold is the fact that most of the force is on your fingers rather than some force on your palm like you're playing shakehand. Your fingers will hurt after every decent training session. One of the main disadvantages from playing penhold is the fact that it's hard to find coaches who know how to coach penhold properly. So if you're serious about improving, I wouldn't suggest playing penhold if you don't have a coach who knows how to coach penhold well. Another problem with playing penhold is the fact that there are so many grip variations. You can have your thumb higher or lower, index finger on the wood part of the blade or on the handle, or completely loose. The backside fingers can be deep, they can be shallow. You can have pointed fingers or flat fingers or curled fingers. There's so many different variations and it gets very confusing, especially for a beginner. It took me about a year to figure out what grip I want to use for the rest of my table tennis life. In my humble opinion, penhold is actually a lot harder to learn than shakehand. Not only will you have to learn all the different finger adjustments and all the wrist adjustments, you also have to learn RPB, which is a pain to learn. Unless you're playing traditional penhold backhand, it's not as hard, but it's a bit awkward to play with, and it takes a bit to get used to. Now for actual information. When you're playing a forehand drive or loop or flat hit, you want to have most of your pressure on your thumb and your backside fingers. This stabilizes the racket angle and makes your shot a lot more consistent.
Don't strain your wrist upwards, nor let it drop down too far. Make your racket in line with your arm. The forehand drive technique for Penholder is almost exactly the same as shakehand. You just have to keep in mind that your arm is actually facing a lot further down than when you play shakehand. Same goes for when you're looping. The technique is exactly the same. You're starting from around knee level and ending around eyebrow level, and you have to adjust to every ball depending on the speed and spin of the incoming ball.
It doesn't matter if you're playing inverted or you're playing short pips. No matter what, you want to keep your thumb and your backside fingers pinched together when you're playing a forehand to stabilize your shot. It looks a lot better and it's more consistent in my opinion.
This is what my technique would look like if I didn't put as much pressure on my thumb. It doesn't look very nice, and I'm very inconsistent.
The only time where you want to put a little bit of pressure on index fingers when you're playing an inside-out forehand. An inside-out forehand is when you fake a down-the-line shot from pivot corner, but instead go cross-court.
You can see me doing one every third shot.
This would probably be the most natural hand position. What you want to do when you're playing RPB is first put pressure on your thumb so that your racket angle is open up a little bit more, and then get a little bit lower.
The backhand drive technique, backhand topspin technique, and backhand loop technique for RPB are almost exactly the same as the respective techniques for shakehand. The main difference is just that you have to focus more on opening the racket angle.
Putting pressure on your thumb also applies when you're topspinning or looping. When you're playing a backhand punch, you want to keep your wrist as stable as possible while doing the drive motion but with a lot more power. Make sure to keep your punching motion as compact as possible, otherwise you will lose out on a lot of control. When playing a traditional penhold backhand, you want most of the pressure to be on your index finger. Your thumb can either be completely loose or holding onto the handle wing. You're punching forward with help of your backside fingers. They should be stacked up onto each other during the stroke. Be sure to keep your racket like this and not at an angle. However, having a little bit of an angle while you're using a traditional penhold backhand is still okay.
Executing TPB involves retracting your arm close to your body and extending it outwards. If you want to hit with more power, just use more force in the process.
When you're doing a forehand push, you want to keep your hand as relaxed as possible and tighten your grip at the moment of contact while you're brushing the ball. This gives it a little bit more spin.
There are two ways to forehand push if you're penhold. One is using your forearm to rotate your arm from your right side onto forward, and another way is just keeping your racket straight up and just going forward, cutting underneath the ball in the process.
If you want to push a no-spin ball or a light underspin ball, you should use your thumb and your backside fingers to adjust your racket angle to become more vertical in order to push while still keeping the ball low. For the backhand push, it's the same process as the forehand push when you're pushing against underspin. You want to keep your hand loose and tighten your grip at the moment of contact, but you can also flick your wrist a little bit if you want to add that extra spin. If you're pushing a no-spin ball, similarly to when you play a traditional penhold backhand, you want to put more pressure on your index finger to make the racket angle more vertical before pushing.
You should also add a little bit of variation by throwing in like a no-spin push or a deadlift.
One fairly advanced thing I want you to keep in mind is the tightening of the fingers and the very small range of flicking the wrist right at the moment of contact for both the forehand and the backhand. This gives you a lot more spin and helps you accelerate into the ball. This is rather advanced. I suggest keeping your wrist and your fingers steady when you're a beginner.
I find that this gives me a lot more power whenever I'm looping, and it also helps me bring the ball over the net whenever I'm looping underspin. This especially helps whenever I'm looping something that's half long. This also helps a lot when it comes to forehand flicks.
For all the serves in table tennis when you're playing penhold, you either have two different adjustments. One is to have your thumb and your backside fingers pinch together while your index finger is loose, or you can have your index finger and your backside fingers pinch together while your thumb is loose. When you're serving a normal pendulum serve, you can do either one.
Hi, so this is me serving pendulum, but having my thumb and backside fingers pinched together. You can see the motion I'm about to do with my wrist. Look at that underspin. Look, the ball almost came completely back to the net. And this is me serving with my index finger and backside fingers pinched together. Also really nice spin.
When doing backhand serve, I suggest putting pressure on your index finger and your backside fingers. When doing a hook serve, I recommend using your thumb and backside fingers. Same thing for reverse pendulum. For reverse pendulum, I suggest doing this because this flattens out the racket angle, which makes it a lot easier to contact the ball. There are many grip variations when you're playing penhold. There's the thumb, their index finger, and then your backside fingers. They can all have different placements depending on the player. A higher thumb in penhold will support a more stable and more powerful forehand. That's why players like Xu Xin and Ryu Seung-min have their thumb very high up. The lower your thumb, the less stability you will have, but the more wrists you can use. Also, if you have a lower thumb, your TPB will be a lot more flexible. I suggest putting your thumb somewhere around here. By the way, I have around average size hands. So yeah, about here. This is how far I put my thumb. For index finger, you can either put your index finger on the handle, on the wood part, or just hanging loose. Putting your index finger hanging loose will make it easier to adjust your racket angle, but it will be a little bit more difficult to hit a more powerful shot. RPB will be a lot easier if you have your index finger completely loose. However, your forehand will be a little bit weaker. If you have your index finger on the handle here, it will be a lot easier to play RPB with more stability, in my opinion. Most professional players have their index finger on the racket handle. For the backside fingers, you can either have them flat out, fingertips, only the fingertips touching the rubber, or you can have them curled up. If you have them curled up, it's a lot easier to play traditional penhold backhand and transition from a drive to like a punch. If you're playing traditional penhold and you want to utilize more forehand, I suggest putting your fingers flat and then stacking your fingers as a transition to a traditional penhold backhand. This is how most one-sided loopers for penhold hold their racket. For more RPB oriented players, I suggest putting your fingertips on the rubber and only the fingertips on the rubber. You can have your pinky finger touching the rubber or not touching, doesn't really matter. This gives you a lot more wrist for the backhand and makes your backhand a bit more stable, but your forehand will be a little bit weaker compared to having it flat out. Wang Hao, who is a RPB oriented penholder, also has his backside fingers like this. And that transitions to having your fingers flat out. I suggest having this if you like to play more forehand than backhand. For example, Xu Xin has his backside fingers flat out. Some penholders have their service grip slightly different from their rally grip. For what I'm saying by that is when someone serves, their grip is different from when they're not serving. For example, Xu Xin has his fingers like this. Before serving and after serving, he puts his index finger on the racket handle. However, he also keeps his grip whenever he's backhand flipping. Ma Lin has his grip like this for most of the time, including serving, but he puts his index finger on the racket handle when he's playing a forehand or RPB. You also have to take in consideration how shallow or how deep your grip is. If you have a deeper grip, your forehand and other strokes will have more stability. But if you have a shallower grip, you will have more flexibility in your strokes. So just experiment with different grips, different ways of holding the penholder racket, and just go with whatever you feel most comfortable with. If you're a right-hander, take your penhold racket and make an imaginary line going from the leftmost edge of the handle going all the way up. You do not want your backside fingers to go any further than that. Otherwise, you will lose out on a lot of control and your penhold grip will look a little bit weird.
I've just finished editing. I hope everyone enjoyed, and yeah, it took a while to edit and record and put everything together. Sorry if the video is super choppy, but I hope you enjoy. Like and subscribe if you did, and please feel free to comment anything you have questions about, anything you agree about, anything you disagree about, and yeah, I like comments. Thanks for watching.